welcome back to True Crime with Police. So today's story is part two of Son of Sam. So before we get into this case, I would like to say I mean no disrespect to the victims or their families. If I get any of the information wrong, I am sorry, that was not my intention. The information I give is what I found in my research of this case. So, this case does contain murders of young adult victims. So, if that is a trigger for you, please feel free to back out of watching this video. Your mental well being comes first, and I am sure I will see you again with another video. So, we left off with the letters that he had sent to the journalist. And on the letters, underneath the Son of Sam, was a logo or a sketch that combined several symbols. The writer's question, "What will you have for July 29th?" was considered an ominous threat. July 29th would be the anniversary of the first 44 caliber shooting. Breslin notified police, who thought that the letter was probably from someone with knowledge of the shooting. The Breslin letter was sophisticated in its wording and presentation, especially when compared to the crudely written first letter. And police suspected that it might have been created in an art studio or similar professional location by someone with expertise in printing, calligraphy, or graphic design. The unusual writing caused the police to speculate that the killer was a comic letterer, and they asked staff members of DC Comics whether they recognized the lettering. The Wicked King Wicker reference caused police to arrange a private screening of The Wicker Man, a 1973 horror movie. The New York Daily News published the letter a week later, after arguing with police to withhold portions of the text, and Breslin urged the killer to surrender himself. The dramatic article made that day's paper the highest selling edition of the Daily News to date. More than 1.1 million copies were sold. Police received thousands of tips based on references in the publicized portions of the letter, all of which proved useless. All the shooting victims to date had long dark hair, and thousands of women in New York acquired shorter haircuts or brightly colored dyes, and beauty supply stores had trouble meeting the demands for wigs. On June 26, 1977, there was another shooting. Sal Lupo, a mechanic's helper, age 20, and Judy Placido, a recent high school graduate aged 17, had left the Alpheus Disque in Bayside, Queens, and were sitting in Lupo's parked car at about 3 a.m. when three gunshots blasted through the vehicle. Lupo was wounded in the right forearm, while Placido was shot in the right temple, shoulder, and back of the neck. Both victims survived their injuries. Lupo told police that the young couple had been discussing the Son of Sam case only moments before the shooting. Neither Lupo nor Placido had seen their attacker, but two witnesses reported a tall, dark-haired man in a leisure suit fleeing from the area. One claimed to see him leave in a car and even supplied a partial license plate number. The first anniversary of the initial .44 caliber shootings was approaching, and police established a sizable dragnet that emphasized past hunting grounds in Queens and the Bronx. However, the next and final .44 shooting occurred in Brooklyn. Early on July 31st, 1977, Stacy Moskowitz, a secretary, and Robert Valente, a clothing store salesman, both aged 20, were in Valente's car, which was parked under a streetlight near a city park in the neighborhood of Bath Beach, on their first date. They were kissing when a man approached within 3 feet of the passenger side of Valente's car and fired 4 rounds into the car, striking both victims in the head before he escaped into the park. A man named Tommy Zano was a witness to the shooting. Valente lost his left eye. Moskowitz, the only blonde victim of David, died from her injuries. That night, Detective John Falatico was awakened at home and told to report to the 10th Homicide Division at the 60th Precinct Station House in Coney Island. He was given 2 weeks to work on the Moskowitz and Valente case as a normal murder investigation. If it could not be solved in the time frame, it was to be given to the Son of Sam task force. Local resident Cecilia Davis was walking her dog at the scene of the Moskowitz and Valente shooting when she saw patrol officer Michael Cantino ticketing a car that was parked near a fire hydrant. Moments after the officer had left, a young man walked past her from the area of the car and seemed to study her with some interest. Davis felt concerned because he was wielding in his hand some kind of dark object. She ran to her home only to hear shots fired behind her in the street. Davis remained silent about this experience for 4 days until she finally contacted police, who closely checked every car that had been ticketed in the area that night. David's 1970 four-door yellow Ford Galaxy was among the cars that they investigated. August 9th, 1977, New York Police Detective James Justice telephoned Yonkers Police to ask them to schedule an interview with David. Yonkers Police dispatcher who first took Justice's call was Wheat Carr, the daughter of Sam Carr and sister of David's alleged cult confederates John and Michael Carr. Justice asked the Yonkers police for some help tracking down David. According to Mike Novotny, a sergeant at the Yonkers Police Department, the Yonkers police had their own suspicions about David in connection with other strange crimes in Yonkers. Crimes that they saw referred to in one of the Son of Sam letters. Yonkers investigators even told the New York City detective that David might be the son of Sam. The next day, August 10th, 1977, police investigated David's car that was parked on the street outside his apartment building at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers. They saw a gun in the back seat, searched the car, and found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to the inspector, Timothy Dowd of the Omega Task Force. Police decided to wait for David to leave the apartment rather than risk a violent encounter in the building's narrow hallway. They also waited to obtain a search warrant for the apartment, worried that their search might be challenged in court. The initial search of the vehicle was based on the handgun that was visible in the back seat, although possession of such a gun was legal in New York State and required no special permit at that time. The warrant still had not arrived when David exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m. and entered his car. Detective John Falatico approached the driver's side of the car. Falatico pointed his gun close to David's temple, while Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger side. A paper bag containing a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver of the type that was identified in ballistics tests was found next to David in the car. David then stated flatly, "Well, you got me." As described in Son of Sam by Lawrence D. Klausner, Detective Falatico remembered the big, inexplicable smile on the man's face. "Now that I got you," Detective Falatico said to the suspect, "who have I got?" "You know," the man said in what the detective remembered as a soft, almost sweet voice. "No, I don't. You tell me." The man turned his head and said, "I'm Sam." "You're Sam? Sam who?" "Sam David Berkowitz." An alternate version claimed that David's first words were reported to be, "Well, you got me. How come it took you such a long time?" Detective John Falatico was officially credited by the NYPD as the arresting officer of the Son of Sam. Police searched apartment 7E and found it in disarray, with satanic graffiti on the walls. They also found diaries that he had kept since he was 21 years old, 3 stenography notebooks, nearly all full, wherein David meticulously noted hundreds of arsons that he claimed to have set throughout New York City. Some sources speculate that this number might be over 1,400. Soon after David's arrest, the address of the building was changed from 35 Pine Street to 42 Pine Street in an attempt to end its notoriety. After the arrest, David was briefly held in a Yonkers police station before being transferred directly to the 60th Precinct on Coney Island, where the detectives task force was located. At about 1 a.m., Mayor Abraham Beame arrived to see the suspect personally. After a brief and wordless encounter, he announced to the media, "The people of the city of New York can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the son of Sam." David was interrogated for about 30 minutes in the early morning of August 11, 1977. He quickly confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. The investigation was led by John Keenan, who took the confession. During questioning, David claimed that his neighbor's dog was one of the reasons that he killed, stating that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls. He said that the Sam mentioned in the first letter was his former neighbor, Sam Carr. David claimed that Harvey, Carr's black Labrador retriever, was possessed by an ancient demon and that it issued irresistible commands that David must kill. A few weeks after his arrest and confession, David was permitted to communicate with the press. In a letter to the New York Post dated September 19, 1977, David alluded to his original story of demonic possession, but closed with a warning that has been interpreted by some investigators as an admission of criminal compliance. There are other sons out there. God help the world. At a press conference in February of 1979, however, David declared that his previous claims of demonic possession were a hoax. David stated in a series of meetings with his special court appointed psychiatrist, David Abrahamson, that he had long contemplated murder to get revenge on the world that he felt had hurt and rejected him. 3 separate mental health examinations determined that David was competent to stand trial. Despite this, defense lawyer advised David to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, but he refused. He appeared calm in court on May 8, 1978, as he pled guilty to all of the shootings. At his sentencing 2 weeks later, David caused an uproar when he attempted to jump out of a window of the seventh floor courtroom. After he was restrained, he repeatedly chanted, "Stacy was a whore," which was his last victim, and then shouted, "I'd kill her again. I'd kill them all again." The court ordered another psychiatric exam before sentencing could proceed. During the evaluation, David drew a sketch of a jailed man surrounded by numerous walls. At the bottom he wrote, "I am not well, not well at all." Nonetheless, David was again found competent to stand trial. On June 12, 1978, David was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for each murder to be served consecutively. He was ordered to serve time in Attica Correctional Facility, an upstate New York supermax prison. Despite prosecutors' objections, the term of David's guilty plea made him eligible for parole in 25 years. For a second, guys. It is crazy that just because he pled guilty to those shootings that he would be eligible for parole. I could not imagine in the 90s if this guy would have gotten out. What would have happened? It's crazy. After his arrest, David was initially confined to a psychiatric ward in Kings County Hospital, where the staff reported that he seemed remarkably troubled by his new environment. On the day after his sentencing, he was taken first to Sing Sing Prison, then to the upstate Clinton Correctional Facility for psychiatric and physical examinations. 2 more months were spent at the Central New York Psychiatric Center in Mercy before his admission to Attica Prison. David served about a decade in Attica until he was relocated to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg in the 90s, where he remained for many years until he was transferred to Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Ulster County. David described life in Attica as a nightmare. In 1979, there was an attempt on David's life in which the left side of his neck was slashed from front to back, resulting in a wound that required more than 50 stitches to close. David refused to identify his assailant, and he claimed only that he was grateful for the attack. It brought a sense of justice, or in David's own words, the punishment I deserve. In 1987, David became an evangelical Christian in prison. According to his personal testimony, his moment of conversion occurred after reading Psalm 34:6 from a Bible given to him by a fellow inmate. He says he is no longer to be referred to as Son of Sam. Instead, he should be called Son of Hope. Soon after his imprisonment, David invited Malachi Martin, an exorcist, to help him compose an autobiography, but the offer was never accepted. During later years, David developed his memoirs with assistance from evangelicals. His statements were released in an interview video, Son of Hope, during 1998, with a more extensive released in book form entitled Son of Hope: The Prison Journals of David Berkowitz. David does not receive any royalties or profit from any sales of his work. He has continued to write essays on faith and repentance for evangelical websites. A website is maintained on his behalf by a church group, since he is not allowed access to a computer. David stays involved with prison ministry and regularly counsels troubled inmates. While in the Sullivan facility, he pursued education and graduated with honors from Sullivan Community College. David is entitled to parole hearings every 2 years as mandated by state law, though he has continuously refused to ask for his release, sometimes even skipping the hearings altogether. Before his first parole hearing in 2002, David sent a letter to New York Governor Greg Pataki demanding that it be canceled. He wrote, "In all honesty, I believe that I deserve to be in prison for the rest of my life. I have, with God's help, long ago come to terms with my situation, and I have accepted my punishment." Officials at the Sullivan facility rejected his demand. In his 2016 hearing at Shawangunk, New York, David stated that while parole was unrealistic, he felt he had improved himself behind bars, adding, "I feel I am no risk whatsoever." His lawyer, Mark Heller, noted that prison staff considered David to be a model prisoner. Commissioners denied his parole. In 2018, the board again denied the release of David on parole. His next hearing was scheduled for May 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed his hearing until further notice. So, that is the story of serial killer son of Sam, David Berkowitz. If you liked the story, please subscribe so you can get notifications when I put new ones out. Again, thank you guys so much for listening.